NFL Live, Mike Tomlin stepping down as the Steelers head coach after 19 seasons. Adam Schefter is with us all show for all the latest news on this. Adam, we begin with this question. Why did Tomlin step down?
Laura, I think this had been on his mind for quite some time, and clearly, if he was ready to tell the team at the 2 o'clock team meeting today, the morning or afternoon after their season ended in a disappointing loss in the wild card round to the Houston Texans, clearly he had made his decision, and the chances are he had made that decision a while ago. Mike Tomlin can do whatever he wants with his life. He can go work in television, which some people expect that ultimately he will do now. He could take the year off. He could take some time and return to coaching. But this had been a long, hard 19 years. His children are grown and out of the house. There are no real connections keeping him grounded to Pittsburgh. And as much as he enjoyed his time for that Steelers organization and praised it in the statement he released, ultimately it just felt like time to move on from that particular job. And so the Pittsburgh Steelers now will be looking for their fourth head coach since 1969, a statement that cannot be uttered in almost any team in the league. Mike Tomlin gets to be somebody who's a normal person with a regular job or not having to work. I think that's something that he's looking forward to doing right now. And we currently have 3 head coach openings in the AFC North alone, with the only returning coach being Zach Taylor in Cincinnati, and 9 overall in the National Football League as the coaching carousel continues to spin and spin.
Yeah, it's been, I think, a lot wilder than many expected. Adam is with us all show long, as I said, and a lot more on the potential replacement for Mike Tomlin coming your way. But first, as Adam mentioned, this statement from Tomlin saying in part, "It has been an absolute honor to lead this team. I'm deeply grateful to Art Rooney II and the late Ambassador Rooney for their trust and support. I'm thankful to the players who gave everything they had every day." Also adding, "I want to thank Steelers Nation. Your passion, loyalty, high expectations represent what makes this franchise truly special." We welcome you here and glad you're with us today. Dan Orlovsky, Mina Kimes, Marcus Spears. Dan, I'll start with you. What's your reaction the first time we're hearing from you on this news?
Not surprising. We all kind of thought this was happening. He's one of the all-time great coaches. If I were the Pittsburgh Steelers, I think the first name that I would call would be Marcus Freeman at Notre Dame. I would call Marcus Freeman, and I don't think I would get off the phone. I would do everything I could to throw everything I could at Marcus Freeman. He's one of the great leaders in football right now, college or the NFL. I think he fits a lot of the characteristics that we've seen from Mike Tomlin and Bill Cowher. It's a new day in Pittsburgh. There obviously needs to be a rebuild and a restart, and we've seen that character and conviction are the trademarks of their coaches rather than X's and O's. So Mike Tomlin, all-time great, and if I were the Steelers, I would get on the phone today.
And youth, right? They've been willing, this organization, to hire younger, maybe less established coaches. Mike Tomlin, it feels like, I know it's been 19 years, but you remember when he was a young defensive coach?
Kind of like out of nowhere.
Out of nowhere, and I was like, oh man, he's replacing the great, Bill Cowher. Okay, so as far as why, before we get to the candidates and what's next for them, let's talk a little bit about why I do think this ultimately was the right decision. First, we have to acknowledge that Mike Tomlin was a victim of his own success. This team was never bad enough to fix the quarterback position. They were always just too good, but then not good enough when you got into the postseason. In fact, their last 4 playoff games, pretty disastrous in terms of, point differential. So he was always making the most out of the team they had, but it was never good enough to really compete with the top of the NFL. I do think that is more about the quarterback than anything else on this team. Granted, this was the most expensive defense in football this year and didn't live up to it, and he definitely wears some of that. But when I look at the failures they've had in the postseason, the struggles over the years, the games that they didn't win, the fact that they've not had one of those elite quarterbacks weighs heavily on that. And then you look to, well, why is that? And I think it's an organizational failure. It's not just on Tomlin. GM Omar Khan is a name I haven't really heard much today. Those are his choices. But Tomlin also had a hand in bringing in some of these vets. Obviously, that's the number one thing that the Steelers have to get figured out for next year, because right now we don't know who's playing quarterback.
Yeah, I share the sentiments with both of y'all. The first thing comes to my mind is, one, he's a Hall of Famer. 2, he's a Super Bowl champion. and kept a franchise relevant for 19 years. And we know the history of the Pittsburgh Steelers. And now Mike Tomlin has a big block in that history of what the Pittsburgh Steelers story is. We remember the games, we remember the plays. He's just a phenomenal coach. Funny story, Mike Tomlin was on the staff with Tampa when I was at the Senior Bowl coming out of college. And you could immediately tell that, and Monty Kiffin was obviously the leader of that defense in Tampa at the time, and you could tell immediately what his character was leading them to. Raheem Morris was also a part of that staff. You saw a lot of young coaches, a lot of guys that just knew what they were doing, knew how to connect to people. And that's what I think about when I think about Mike Tomlin. He was a connector. And in this business, a lot of times we get caught up in the X's and O's and how good is this coach offensive philosophy or defensive philosophy, or what do they do specially on game day. But Mike Tomlin, you don't have that amount of winning seasons without making guys believe that they can compete each and every time they step on the field. And I think that's the first thing we need to say about him. And to your point, MK, he is a victim of his own success, because Mike Tomlin only knew how to coach one way, and that was to win every single game he was in. And it was almost, to your point, a fault of the organization. We've been talking about this revolving cycle that the Pittsburgh Steelers have been in with trying to find a quarterback, trying to figure that position out. We've seen them patchwork it and makeshift and bring guys in. They drafted Kenny Pickett. That didn't work out, but that was still a late first-round pick.
Yep.
But Mike Tomlin today, stepping away from the game, to Schefter's point, is going to be able to do whatever he wants to do. But ultimately, we going to remember Mike Tomlin as a football coach. And I don't think it's in. I'm not writing his obit, and I'm not talking about him being away from the game. Maybe he takes a reprieve and gets back into it somewhere else, newly revived, because the one thing we know about him is he can coach this game, as we've witnessed for so long during his tenure in Pittsburgh.
Yeah, Adam, what are his next steps that you know of?
Well, again, first of all, the Steelers control his rights. So, again, I don't view coaching another team as an option this year. Could he return to coaching at some point in time? Maybe, but it's not going to be this year. Could he be on television this year? I think that absolutely could happen, and that would be a way for him to stay involved, much in the same way that Sean Payton stayed involved in the year that he was away from the game. He went to work for Fox, spent the year out there, and then returned to coaching. That will be one of the primary options that Mike Tomlin has available to him in this particular situation. But I want to touch on a couple of other things. I go back almost 2 decades to when the Pittsburgh Steelers hired Mike Tomlin. It was a bold, courageous choice at the time, at a time where everybody expected they were going to hire Russ Grimm as their next coach, succeeding Bill Cowher. And the Steelers had the strength and courage to go outside the box and hire a defensive coordinator that was little known from the Minnesota Vikings in that day and age. And I remember when that news came down some 19 years ago, people were completely floored that the Steelers went in that direction. Now that Mike Tomlin is gone, this obviously is going to have enormous ramifications on the Pittsburgh Steelers. And we start with the quarterback, Aaron Rodgers. For all the discussion there was about the possibility that Aaron Rodgers could return next year, does anybody think he's coming back to Pittsburgh if Mike Tomlin isn't there? Who thought he was coming back anyway to begin with? So it looks like the early sense would be this certainly diminishes any chance that Aaron Rodgers would return to Pittsburgh. Now the Steelers have to go find a coach, as all these other teams are looking for coaches. And I could tell you that I think this news completely surprised the Steelers. They thought he was coming back next season. And when I had contact with members of that organization this afternoon, they were surprised to hear when we called to say, Mike Tomlin's informing your team at 2 o'clock today that he's stepping aside. They did not know that at that time. I think he informed Art Rooney of his plans this morning, and that was the first time that the Steelers, I think, began thinking, okay, what do we have to do to find a next head coach? You brought up the name Marcus Freeman. I fully expect that he's staying at Notre Dame this year. He's not going anywhere this year, is my expectation and understanding.
Okay. Go ahead, Marcus.
Oh, go ahead. Schefter, so with them owning his rights, would another team have to do what kind of they had to do for Sean Payton